At number 5, I've got the Mississippi State Bulldogs. And you go through their slate, guys. They open up with Eastern Kentucky, then at Arizona State in week 2, Toledo in week 3. Then they've got the Florida Gators in Starkville to open up SEC play. Then they're at Texas, an open date on October the 5th. Then at Georgia, Texas A&M, Arkansas, UMass. Then at Tennessee, open date on November the 16th. Guys, do not forget all SEC teams are getting 2 bye weeks this year. So that open date on the 16th. Then Missouri on November the 23rd and at Ole Miss on November the 30th. But again, guys, you look at this schedule, the road games, at Texas, at Georgia, at Tennessee, and at Ole Miss. You miss Alabama, but at what cost, right? At what cost? A really, really tough draw for year 1 of the Jeff Levy era in Starkville. And again, guys, you look at the non-conference. I know Arizona State wasn't great, but anytime you got to go out to the desert, that's a tough game. Toledo was a really, really good team, a really good group of 5 team this year. So it is a tough slate start to finish for Mississippi State. I would say the one positive for them is the road games are spread out. Based off what I'm seeing outside of at Texas, at Georgia, those are thankfully separated for them by an open date. But that's the only time you have back-to-back road games in the schedule. But again, Mississippi State's 2024 slate is tough as any in the SEC. At number 4, guys, and I feel like for the upper echelon of the SEC, right, we don't talk about how tough their schedules are because of how good they are, right? I mean, I said it many times that Georgia's 2023 slate, that while I understand it was not as tough a slate as some others. Don't get me wrong. But you looked at that schedule, and I said to myself, are we saying that Georgia's schedule is easy because they don't play anybody good, or because Georgia is so much better than everyone else? So that's something you got to keep in mind. But it's interesting how the upper echelon, the elites, the top-tier teams in the SEC, they don't get any benefit of the doubt, right? Because, oh, you're so good. Who cares? Your schedule's no good. At number 4, guys, I've got Alabama. And you may say to yourself, really? Listen to this schedule. You open up Western Kentucky, South Florida, no big deal first 2 weeks. Then you're at Wisconsin, tricky non-conference game in week 3. Then you've got an open date. You open up SEC play with the Georgia Bulldogs in the final weekend of September. Granted, this is a game in Tuscaloosa, but still, Georgia is coming to town. Then you're at Vanderbilt, South Carolina, at Tennessee, Missouri. Then you've got your open date. Then you're at LSU, Mercer, at Oklahoma, and Auburn to close it out. Guys, that final stretch, at Tennessee, Mizzou, open date, at LSU, you get the one breather against Mercer, but then at Oklahoma and Auburn to close it out. That's got to be one of the toughest finishing stretches in college football, right? So Bama's schedule in 2024 takes a back seat than 0-1. And that last stretch there, like I mentioned, guys, in the final month of the season or so, really, really difficult for the Crimson Tide. At number 3, I've got the Georgia Bulldogs, guys. You go look at their schedule. Nobody's going to be talking about how weak Georgia's schedule is in 2024. That is for sure, because you just look at the non-conference, guys. Georgia opens up neutral site game in Atlanta against the Clemson Tigers. That one's going to be a lot of fun. But you open up with Clemson. Then you got Tennessee Tech. Your SEC opener is at Kentucky. That'll be a tricky game. Georgia going up against their former quarterback and transfer Brock Vandagriff, who by all accounts is going to be the Kentucky Wildcats starting quarterback in 2024. Then you've got the open date. Then you're at Alabama. So your first 2 SEC games, guys, are at Kentucky and at Alabama. Then you've got Auburn, Mississippi State, at Texas, right? Auburn, Mississippi State, at Texas. Then you've got the open date. Then you got Florida and Jacksonville, at Ole Miss, Tennessee, UMass, and Georgia Tech. So, guys, listen to these road games. At Kentucky, at Bama, at Texas, at Ole Miss. And then your non-conference of Clemson. After that, it falls off, right? Tennessee Tech, Georgia Tech, and UMass. But opening up with Clemson in the non-conference, those road games, you do draw Texas, you do draw Alabama. an absolute gauntlet that Georgia will face in 2024. Thankfully for the Dogs, they do have Carson Beck returning. QB1 will lead them through that, but nobody is going to be talking about how weak Georgia's schedule is this next offseason. At number 2, we wondered whether the new members of the SEC, Oklahoma or Texas, would be welcomed rudely. I think it's safe to say that Oklahoma is getting the short end of the stick with their schedule. At number 2, I've got the Oklahoma Sooners. They do open up soft, guys. I say quote-unquote soft. They open up with Temple, Houston, and Tulane in the non-conference. Their SEC opener, September the 21st, against the Tennessee Volunteers in Norman. Then they go to Auburn, an open date. Then Texas in Dallas, of course, in the Red River rivalry. Then they have South Carolina, at Ole Miss, Maine, at Missouri, then an open date. Then, guys, they finish, get this, Alabama in Norman on November 23rd, and then at LSU to close out the season on November the 30th. Guys, that schedule is insane, right? Houston's a quality program. Tulane, right? They were really good this year. That's a great group of 5 program. I mean, Tennessee's a really tough way to open SEC play. Having to go to Jordan-Hare for your first ever SEC road game, at least as a member of the SEC, that's absurd, right? Their rivalry with Texas, enough said. You do draw South Carolina at home, which could be a tricky game. At Ole Miss is a tough one. At Mizzou's a tough one. And then, like I mentioned, Bama and LSU back-to-back to close it out. I mean, the SEC did Oklahoma no favors when it comes to their first SEC schedule. And finally, guys, the toughest schedule in the SEC going into 2024. And, guys, this one is no surprise. And the hits keep coming for Billy Napier down in Gainesville because, guys, this 2024 slate, it had to be made by Kirby Smart himself. It had to be made by Georgia fans themselves because, my goodness, Florida may have the toughest schedule we've ever seen in SEC play. 11 Power 5 opponents on this schedule. 11 Power 5 opponents, guys. Let's go through this. You open up with Miami in Gainesville. Then you go Samford, Texas A&M is your SEC opener on September the 14th. That game, of course, and the Swamp. Then you go to Mississippi State. Then you have an open date. Here's where it gets fun. You got Central Florida at home, at Tennessee, Kentucky. Then an open date. Guys, listen to this closing stretch in the month of November. You've got Georgia and Jacksonville, at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, finally at Florida State. That closing stretch of Georgia and Jacksonville, at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and at Florida State. There's not a tougher closing stretch in college football than what I just presented. Florida's 2024 slate, I mean, it's a murderer's row, guys. And for a coach in Billy Napier that's trying to bounce back from a really tough 5-win season, it's a pivotal year 3 for him, right? Trying to find some positive momentum. And I think, you ask Florida fans, what's the minimum expectation in year 3 of Billy Napier? What does Napier have to do? I mean, guys, if you say he's got to go 8-4 or better, how? Because right now, Florida is an underdog in every single one of those games down the stretch that I just mentioned. Georgia in Jacksonville, at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, at Florida State. Florida's 2024 schedule is the gauntlet of all gauntlets. You've got that one non-conference game against Samford that you're like, check it off as a W. Guys, in the non-con, Miami, Central Florida, and at Florida State. Those games are at best toss-ups. And then the SEC slate that you have that is so unforgiving. Road games at Tennessee, Georgia in Jacksonville, at Texas, at Mississippi State. an absolute gauntlet awaits Billy Napier in year 3. So again, guys, my top 5 toughest schedules in 2024. At number 5, Mississippi State. At number 4, Alabama. At number 3, Georgia. Number 2, Oklahoma. And number 1, the Florida Gators.